Starfield Direct is just a few days away, and I'm sure you're all just as excited as I am. Over the last year, we've covered every single scrap of news, information, and really just about every single inch of the Starfield showcase, and it's been a wonderful journey for myself and the channel, but one thing we've never truly gone into is how factions will work. Now, I've of course mentioned it before in the past, but we've never done a full video about it because Bethesda have had many different faction systems in their previous games. Now, probably since around Skyrim's release, Bethesda have had a system in place to allow you to join almost every faction in the same playthrough. You can join the Thieves Guild in Skyrim and the Dark Brotherhood, despite the Thieves Guild not agreeing with the Dark Brotherhood's ways. In Fallout 4 this did kind of change. While we could still join every single faction and do mostly all of their questlines, towards the end of the main story we could get kicked out of certain factions depending on who you sided with. For example, the Brotherhood of Steel will turn against you if you suddenly choose to side with the Institute. This was changed from Skyrim's system, of course, mostly because Fallout 4's factions were all joined into the main questline, and it appears the same type of system will be used for Starfield when we compare it to Bethesda's previous biggest game, that of course being Fallout 4. Let me just give you a little example. With Constellation, we have the faction that will guide us through the main questline and most likely be the first faction that we come across in the game, and it does appear that we will be somewhat forced into joining this faction. Constellation appear to be the neutral faction of Starfield, and of course this all sounds a lot like the Minutemen from Fallout 4. They will likely stand by our side no matter which faction we choose in the main questline. And then we can take a look at the Freestar Collective, who appear to be the lawful good faction, fighting for freedom, fighting against, government and other factions likely trying to get us to join them in their cause for a rebellion. And of course this sounds very similar too, with Fallout 4's Railroad, who basically did the exact same type of thing for the Institute Simps. But this gets even more obvious with the United Colonies, who very much look like the unlawful good faction. Meaning they kind of are doing okay things, but they probably go about it in the wrong way, much like, you guessed it, the Brotherhood of Steel in Fallout 4. Both a large military presence aiming to pretty much control whatever they can, always thinking that they're right and being quite closed-minded. Now the last two factions do appear to be very different though, of course now comparing the Crimson Fleet to the Institute, however both factions are clearly the evil faction slash bad guy faction. But what I'm getting at is that it just seems insanely obvious to me personally that Bethesda will be taking somewhat of the same route with Starfield's factions as they did with Fallout 4. However, with that said, we also know of a few other joinable factions such as Region Industries, the company on Neon, that we can apply to join and actually sit through a job interview with. It doesn't appear that this faction will be tied into the game's main story like the others, but rather they'll have their own entire questline, much more similar to how Skyrim's factions worked. So even if Starfield's four main factions are all tied to the main story, it's important to note that this hasn't actually been confirmed yet, it just seems obvious. We will still have some side factions too that won't be tied to the game's main quest. And look, personally, I think that this is really great, mixing both systems together sounds like a win-win. I do prefer how Skyrim's factions worked myself. I loved the individual quest lines over the, all joint ones. But of course, with that said, I also really like how personal every faction felt in Fallout 4, so if Starfield does mix the two faction systems together, I personally will be very happy. But just looking beyond all of this, Starfield does look like it has a very in-depth faction system, if you will. Like I just mentioned, we can literally sit through a job interview to join one of them. That of course being Region Industries, who are a big corporation based on Neon. And we even know that we can go undercover with the United Colonies to sort of infiltrate the Crimson Fleet, which sounds really fun to me. But honestly, companions could be a big part of this system too. Now I am speculating on this part, I just want to make that very clear. But if we again look back at Bethesda Game Studios' previous games, we know that every faction, or at least the vast majority of factions, have their own companions slash followers. Of course in Skyrim these were mostly just unnamed NPCs and such, but in Fallout 4 every joinable main faction in the base game comes with a super detailed and in-depth companion, usually one that you can even romance. And I wouldn't be surprised if we have the same type of system for Starfield, such as Vasco being Constellation's companion. Or, you know, the Crimson Fleet giving us a pirate companion who likes it when we steal, thief, and murder NPCs. But I will say, if Bethesda are going to use this faction system again, where they just give us a new companion for almost every faction, I would be kinda disappointed if Vasco is the only Constellation companion, as I'd like to see a human companion for that faction too. Now there has also been some rumours of a disguise system being in Starfield, where if we, for example, wear Crimson Fleet armour, we may be able to sneak aboard one of the Crimson Fleet ships, much like New Vegas and Outer Worlds disguise systems. This is just a rumour though, and there hasn't been anything concrete to prove this, like at all, so just take it with a massive grain of salt. Starfield Direct is in just a couple of days anyway, so we may get some answers to all of this stuff there. But that is pretty much all I have to say today. I do apologise for the short video, but as I just said, Starfield Direct is in a few days and we're going to be covering every single piece of news and information that comes out of it, while we slowly break down the entire showcase over the next few weeks, or maybe even the next few months, depending on how much we actually get to see at said event. So if you do want to stay up to date on all of it, consider subscribing. I've got you covered and this is the place for it. Lastly, as always, a big thank you to our channel members. You guys are absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for your